Okay, so the the premise of this course, Code Camp, whatever you want to call it, is just for me to feed you guys information on not only how um, programming, not only how Python works, but how programming works in general as well. Because at the end of the day, if you know programming lingo, the programming paradigms. If you know what a function is on Python, you know what a function is on Java or JavaScript or C++ or even embedded systems. And it's just a translation from one programming language to the other. So that's kind of a great thing there. There is a lot of nuances between the different languages. And thankfully, Python is probably the most uh, easily accessible language for beginners because it is the most like English out of all of them. For example, in Python, to do a print statement or to basically get a console to show you some kind of response, you just type in print and then whatever you want inside parentheses. And we'll go over this in a minute, but so Python, it's as simple as saying, okay, I want to do a print statement, so I type in the word print and then the content. In C++, uh, the equivalent of print is actually cout. So Python print is equal to literally print with something in it. You've probably seen that in the Word document I gave everybody to go through to test your system. So Python print is that. So in C++, that's everybody's probably heard of C++. That's one of the big languages. It's kind of a commercial language. I guess it's really powerful. But in C++, to print, instead of doing print, you have to do cout. Okay. And so there for Python to do an input, it's that. For C++, input is cin something. So that's just one example of how Python is easier to understand and some of the differences there. If we go and look at like Java print statements, for example, Java print statement is print ln parentheses. And in reality, there's more to it. Stuff like that. So Python is the easiest to understand. You can see it, right? Okay. And we'll go through that. But in theory, this print statement is equal more or less to this print statement, and this equal more or less to this print statement. So you'll notice as we go through stuff, and if you start looking at other languages, whatever from Python to Rust to C++ to C# to Java, all these things translate. But like a translator between different languages, so the word snow in English is relatively equal to the word snow in Inuit, right? But there's differences, and so there's some similarities. In some cases, they copy over very directly, like this, except for Java, this is saying print a line, where this one's saying just print this. This one's saying push out into the terminal that. So again, they're basically the same. They're 98% the same, but there's some differences there. Do we get Zach on the mic or finally?
I can hear you guys.
Okay, cool.
You can hear me finally? Okay, good.
Yep, we can hear you. Okay, so in this class, we're going to try to go over functions, which is a huge piece of programming in general. Actually, we're going to talk about functions today even. We're going to go over object-oriented programming, which everybody's probably kind of heard float around like one of those buzzwords in programming. We're going to go over variables. What are variables? How do you use them? Different types of data types. So the difference between a string and an integer and a Boolean, stuff like that. Logic. So how does true statements work inside programming? Because when you boil down a program, it's actually very straightforward. If you can read line by line and decipher what it's saying, it's very straightforward. It always uses logic of some sort to process stuff. We're going to go over databases eventually, how to push and pull content in and out of a database from Python. We'll get exposed to Git, which if you guys didn't catch on it from basically lesson 0, Git is incredibly important to control source code. This is what enables 1,000 programmers to work on the same project at a time, is through technologies like Git. Otherwise, we've all experienced it where you have a WordPad opened, or a Word document open one place, and somebody tries to open it another place, and it says, "Oh, this is only a read-only copy." That will be happening all the time for people. Then we're going to learn how to do some GUI. So that's graphical user interface. So basically, we're going to make a program like a Windows program, and then we'll keep going as time permits. So I really have just a couple rules, and these aren't rules that are for me to make sure you guys are doing your work or whatever. I don't care. These are rules to make sure that you're successful. The first one is, when we get into programming, every time I type in a line of code, you need to type that code in. So everything I do in VS Code, you need to do as well, because that's the only way to get exposure. And for the first 2-3 weeks, it's basically going to be memorizing, rote memorization. Okay, print does this, input does that, da 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 da. And the only way to figure that out is by just repetition. And right now, we've only talked about print, so it's easy. But when there's 50 different functions that are built into Python, and you haven't tested them, then you don't know they exist, and that basically hinders you from being able to continue on. The next one is I'm going to make mistakes on purpose sometimes and on accident. I'm not the world's best programmer, but VS Code is awesome in such a way that it will tell you what's wrong. So if we're typing here and you see like a little, like when you spell a word wrong on Word, there's that little up and down jaggedy thing underneath the word that you spelled wrong or something like that. VS Code does the same thing. And when you mouse over, it'll say, it'll pop up and say, blink, this variable doesn't exist in your program. And you're like, oh crap, I misspelt it. But so there's syntax errors like that. You're not using functions properly. And then there's also just functional errors, like you're not passing the right type of data into it. And Python and VS Code will tell you what it says. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's very clear, and sometimes you need a Rosetta Stone to get it to tell you what the hell it's saying. And so in terms of that, your best friend going through this will be Google and Stack Overflow. So when you get an error and it says, syntax error, yada, 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 you'd be like, what the hell does this mean? Copy it, paste it in Google, and then kind of look for what people say. The most popular website is Stack Overflow. Everybody uses it as a programmer because if you made that mistake, probably 1,000 people before you've made the same mistake, or 100,000 people made you before that mistake, and they asked somebody, and some expert in the past said, "No, bro, you're doing it the wrong way." And we'll go through that. Like I said, I'm going to make mistakes, and we'll work through them together, and we'll see. Okay, that's how you process them. I was telling Casey last week. I think it was last week. Well, maybe even this week. A programmer, when you get into work life as a programmer, you're not going to spend 8 hours a day just cranking out code. That's not realistic. It's in reality, you spend probably I'd say at least 50% of your day reading code because you're not going to be the only one writing on this. So you're going to come into a job and it's going to have this 500 500 file project, and you're going to say, how does this all connect? And so you're going to spend hours every day tracing back to what somebody did in the past. You will write code, obviously, but I would suspect that'd be only like maybe 30% of your day. So 50% would be reading somebody else's code, 30 is writing your own code, and then the other 20% is figuring out what the hell you did wrong. I say that jokingly, but in all seriousness, that's what's going on. Either you're doing something wrong in the code, or you're trying to launch it incorrectly, something like that. So reading errors is absolutely a skill you have to have. It's like the equivalent of getting to high school and realizing that you don't know how to do math. That's how important reading error logs are and stuff like that. The other rule is at the end of every session, we should push our code up to GitHub so that we have one experience with GitHub, and two, you can see your progress, where we're at, where everybody else is at. And eventually we'll start kind of sharing code when we start getting into unique projects. If we get to that point, we'll start sharing codes, and everybody can look at each other's codes and work together on different things. And to round that off, I'm going to try to give out homework, and it's not going to be graded. It's strictly for reinforcing ideas that we covered. Because we're only going to do 2 hours a week, and there's another, I don't know, 166 hours out of the week that nothing's going to be going on, whatever that time is there. So it's good to practice. You can move forward. I'm gonna go at the same pace that I'm going now. I'm not going to jump past anything. So if you decide to do your own little studying, awesome, perfect. If you have questions, I could probably answer them. A lot of the times on the spot. I think Casey could attest to that. I'll say, "Oh, what do you think you did wrong there?" Did he cut out for everyone else? Did he cut out for?
No,
Okay.
everything was fine on my end.
Okay, so it must have been on my side. Sorry.
No problem. So if you decide to go on your own code camp journey, you can ask me questions, whatever. That's awesome. That's more power to you, because this at 2 hours a week, it's going to take us a long time to get through it. But again, this is only to give you the very basic foundational pieces of programming in general. So some people spend 30 years programming and they're still learning. Okay, any questions about that before we dive in here?
I can't think of any.
No. Okay. All right. And stop me at any point. If I type something that doesn't make sense, or you have a question or something like that, just ask. Because probably somebody else is like, yeah, okay, what Alex skimmed over that part. What does that mean? All right. So, my system here is going to be a little bit different. So where you see classes on my screen should be your PCC folder itself. You can do it either way, but I have actually my outline on another page here. So let's talk about a few things before we get started. Let's talk about VS Code itself. It is an incredibly powerful free tool. They could charge for it, but they don't. I think they charge enterprise for some pieces of it. I'm not sure, but VS Code is amazing. VS Code is what is called an IDE, which I think stands for Integrated Development Environment. So before IDEs, what programmers had to do is they would literally write code in Notepad or something like that, save it, compile it, and then run it. It was a huge pain. Slow. It was tedious. With stuff like VS Code, you can write your code in that same Notepad, more or less, but you can have the terminal or your compiler running at the same time. So you can see what you're doing wrong, make adjustments, save it, rerun it in a fraction of the time that old school developers had to do. And so we'll go over some stuff. You'll basically become pros at VS Code. There's obviously other IDEs out there. There's PyCharm, there's IntelliJ. Python itself has its own IDE called Idle. We're not going to use those, but you can. And just keep in mind that when you get to a business, they might say, no, you can't, no, Zach, you can't use VS Code. We all use IntelliJ. And so a lot of the same concepts in VS Code are ubiquitous with other IDEs. So again, it's a very good learning environment to get, your feet wet. Okay. So if at any point we're going and we're going through code, now we're in the future. You guys don't have to do this. Okay, so we're going and you're like, what does print do? Right? You're just not sure what print does. Now, obviously we all fundamentally understand what print does, but later there'd be like some bizarro function, random num floor modulo, yada yada yada. You're like, what does this mean? What is this even saying? What does it want? The next great part about VS Code is you can mouse over that piece, and if you control click, it opens up a blurb about it. So you can see definition print. It takes values of objects. It tells you what it all requires. And so it makes life a little bit easier for you. Yeah. So eventually you'll want to do this where if you have a whole bunch of variables, like if we have test var here, let's see if this works. So you can see, first off, already there's a you see that little jaggedy thing underneath there. So if we mouse over it, all right. So VS Code's already telling us test var is not defined. Oh yeah, okay, I misspelled test var. So there you go. That's how you error check. The other thing is, if you Yeah. So we're gonna have to do 30-minute stints. Sorry, guys, but we'll start it up again. So if you don't know what test var is, let's say you had a 1,000-line program and you don't know what test var is, you just control click it and it jumps you to where it was. So you see how it took us right there. So very useful tools, and we'll use them a lot. We'll be using VS Code to help us stay on the straight and narrow. Okay, the other thing I want to talk about is casing. So you guys have probably heard about camel case, snake case, all that kind of stuff, right? Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you've ran across it, stuff like that. All that means is how you structure your stuff. So, for example, camel case, when we talk about camel case, that means that the first letter of the first word is lowercase, but then every word after that is capitalized. So you can see camel case is weird. Each of the first ones are there, and all those words are crammed together. So basically here we're saying camel case is weird, which is a camel case format for that is equal to 8. We'll get to that in a minute here. Okay, so that's camel case. Now there's another one that Python kind of brought around called snake case, and that's so if we do that, so snake case, each word within the variable or the file or whatever has an underscore in between it. So you guys don't have to you don't write these yet. These are just, I'm giving you examples of what we're gonna do. Mostly we're gonna do camel case because that's kind of the standard there, but we'll have to make adjustments and stuff like that as you go, depending on what file structure. So there's a standard, there's a written rule on how Python should be done. And we're going to try to fit that as close as possible so you guys don't get taught improper techniques. Okay. So that is the introduction. Anybody have any questions about that before we get started on the first guy, the first section?
I can't get my thing to do what you're doing.
Do you have Python installed? Go over here. Go over here. Type in Python. No. That top one. Okay, it's installed. So escape. Sorry, guys. Michael has a problem. Okay, what do you name it? You need to name it .py. Yep. Okay, so we have 6 minutes here. There you go. Okay. All right. Oh, somebody has a question. All right. They're already dogging on you, Michael.
Cool, thanks.
Okay. All right, so let's get started. So for the first several times, I'm going to go through this with you guys. So let's make a new file. So we're going to right click here. And so you're going to do that inside your PCC folder. Right click, new file. And we're going to call it print.py. Okay, now what that does is it signals to VS Code and the whole computer in general that this file we're touching is a Python file. So that extension.py tells you it's Python. If we did .txt, it tells you it's a text file. If we did .xls or whatever, that's Excel. We've all seen that, right? Like .pdfs or PDFs, yada yada yada. So in here, that idea extends over here as well. So we need to always put .py unless we're doing something different on purpose. Okay, so again, remember everything I type, unless I tell you don't type it, you need to copy as well. So let's do our first function. So let's do print. This is my first sentence. Okay. So when you do that, you need to ensure that you put in print parentheses and then the string. This is my first sentence. Now you can see there's double quotations on either side of that, which signals to Python that what we're putting in is a string. Does anybody know what a string is? Has anybody looked that up before or ran into it?
I do not.
You don't? Okay. All right. So a string is basically just a whole bunch of characters put together. They can be numbers, they can be words, they can be symbols. They be whatever they want. But basically, and the easiest understanding is a string is a sentence.
Okay.
So we can do, this is my first sentence. We can do pi is 3.14. We could even do 3.14. Those are all strings. They're strings because they are in quotation marks. If they're not in quotation marks, then they're not a string, period. Now, quotation marks can either be doubled, it can be single, doubled, or any combination as long as they match on the beginning and the end. So if you're lazy or if you're British, you do single quotes. Wow, right? And so if we run this, we can run this by saving it. You guys don't see this top bar, do you? Where it says, okay. All right. So every time you make a command or enter a line in, you need to save it before you ever run it. So I'm going to do print wow. Okay. So I'm going to go to terminal, new terminal. And you see down here, this should open up for everybody. It'd be a different size or another. And you will want to navigate to wherever this is. So in your case, maybe it's just /PCC. And then to run it, you type in Python print.py. So you're telling the terminal, I want to run a Python command of this file name. And let's see it. There you go. So there's that print. Everybody get that? That print statement going?
Mine did not work.
Mine says no such file or directory.
Okay, so let's spend some time here. Zach, share your screen if you will, and everybody will walk through Zach's, and maybe you can match it.
I'm on Zoom on my phone, dude.
Oh, okay. Caleb,
Yeah.
that's okay. Caleb, can you share?
Give me a second. Let's see. I never used Zoom before, so I don't even know where that's at.
Should be at the bottom, next to in the center of the program.
Oh, okay.
I think it says share with a little box and an arrow pointing up.
Yep.
It says host disable participant screen sharing.
Okay, try it again. Okay, Michael's gonna. Oh, there he goes. All right. So again, remember, this is part of Airlog work. So says, can you scroll up just a little bit down in the terminal? All right. So Python print.py, nothing. So then you try print py by itself. All right. So it's telling you print py, the term py is not recognized as a command, function, or script, which means that second command you did didn't work because you need to tell Python